Thank you all for being here. And I think we'll just dive right in first with the first question. So to start off, please introduce yourselves briefly and then tell us what youth-centered investments mean to you in the context of climate action and in the context of the various discussions that we've been having here this week. So I'll come to you first, Richard, since you're online and we've not heard from you yet. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Khalita, and good afternoon, panelists, for putting together this very interesting discussion. I'm Richard Munang, and I serve with the United Nations Environment Program. And one of the key aspects that I think is quite very, very instrumental in this conversation is the fact that, has already been mentioned, which is that of perspective. Of course, Africa is a young continent. As we're speaking today, over 70% of the entire population of the continent is under the age of 30 years. And more to that, in 7 years from today, 42% of the entire global youthful population will be in the African continent. It therefore means that the demographic discussion, though it's discussed from the lens of dividends, needs to be looked very critically, because you can only have a dividend when you have invested in it. And therefore, when you look at it from that perspective of investment, then agriculture will become quite very, very instrumental. But the continent also have the perspective that needs to be appreciated. Ratifying the Paris Climate Change Agreement, 98% of the entire continent have ratified that. And within the climate Paris, the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, 70% of those are sustainable agriculture and clean energy. And therefore, leveraging this space to drive climate action through the lens of agriculture, empowering it using clean energy solutions, become quite very, very instrumental. And the United Nations Environment Program is actually working with countries, especially leveraging 4 aspects. The first one is that we must be able to retool the skills of these young people, because without retooling their skills, to be aligned, to be able to utilize opportunities within nature space, within biodiversity, as well as climate action and pollution action space, we might not be able to move forward. And so we're working through universities, integrating and putting climate action within the vision of national development and creating what is called climate action entrepreneurship, to be able to ensure that at least turning waste to biofertilizer to replace chemicalized fertilizer can put more money in more pockets of youths. They provide inputs to be able to drive agricultural sustainable production, and how they can leverage clean energy solutions like solar power, solar dryers to add value, as well as also leverage solar power irrigation to drive transformation. The second aspect, which is quite very important, is how to turn these NDCs into investment plans. Because speaking today, 72% of all Africa NDCs do not have investment plans. And even the 28% that do have investment plans are just costed. And so putting in place enabling environment to attract investors to turn the NDCs into investment plans and into actions become quite very important. And the third aspect is developing de-risking tools. And actually, like Mr. Bebe, pointing to the fact that the diversity of youth is important. And I've argued Africa is an informal continent. We cannot be able to discuss a continent that have 80% of the population and of the jobs created by the informal sector not actually put within that context. And they do not have access to banks. And even if they do have, because of the lack of records of their credit history, they are unable to access financing. And so developing de-risking tools and leveraging communal cooperatives that are accessible to these people become important. And the last aspect, which I think is quite very crucial, is actually using what we call sustainable budgeting approach to then be able to put in place incentives that the young people who are partaking in climate action solutions, whether they're turning waste to biofertilizer or they're fabricating solar dryers, then benefit from incentives like tax breaks or tax breaks from for biofertilizer or for producing solar dryers, so that at least they can create their enterprises to value to agriculture and provide the inputs. And in that way, we can then be able to drive not only transformational agriculture that is climate resilient, but at the same time lower emissions and also have the environment intact.
Thank you very much, Richard. That was very rich. I think I saw a lot of people taking notes. So that's also already a great start. Thank you. I would like to come back to you, Richard, to Wayne, because she brought up an important point of commercial banks increasing their lending to green enterprises. So I'd like to ask you to weigh in on how such national level financial institutions can increase their support and what needs to change in the enabling environment. What is the role of government there in facilitating that increase in finances to green enterprises? Thank you. Richard, over to you.
Yeah, thanks again. I think the panelists have done justice, to put things in perspective. And I think what I would do in answering that question is to bring in one aspect, which is that of narrative. I think the narrative of adaptation as a social endeavor, that combining it with mitigation to power adaptation to be able to de-risk adaptation products and services themselves has been a missing link within the African continent. Because funding adaptation without actually showing offshots of how you are going to get the goods and the product to make money and then pay back is a problem. Said, if you look at the entire African continent today, and I'll go to where I started, it is an informal continent, whether we like it or not, and the structures that are accessible to people, women, youth, young people, are not actually targeted by development financing institution and multilateral donor institutions. And that then means that the Tongtings, the Njangis, the Chamas, as they call them, across different names across the entire African continent today, needs to be targeted so that at least donor funding actually leverage that. And we've done this in Uganda using the Buganda Kingdom and PEWOSA, which is one of the biggest cooperatives in the entire country that leverages what is called Village Savings and Loans Association to decentralize funding to communities. And those communities are actually trained on climate action solutions, both mitigation like solar dryers, to power value addition in agricultural products that are produced using nature-based solutions. Set. Commercial banks will definitely not be able to actually lend, and even if they're lending to the informal sector, they will lend at a very high interest rate. What needs to happen is that governments need to start developing what is called risk-sharing facilities or risk guarantees, so that at least the little money that government have, and even development or donors have, and multilateral institutions have, should work to then develop these de-risking facilities so that they can enable commercial banks to be able to lend to those in the informal sector, especially the young people. And they should develop products that are actually targeting these solutions that, for example, biofertilizer that I mentioned, that is actually a market that is increasing at a compounded rate of 5.9% in the next 3 years. And that is quite very, very instrumental. I think the other aspect is de-risking the attitudes of young people. I have argued this, and I will say it again here. If you threw $1 trillion US today to any youth, you give them $1 trillion US today, and that youth doesn't have the right skill and the right attitude, and in this case, with a dose of passion, you are still not going to achieve anything. And people will not be able to talk about finances from a liquid perspective and also talk about aspects that don't actually have to do with finance, which is attitude change, which is developing passion to be able, because passion is what I call the new currency of now, in addition to the money, to then start to be rich by, first of all, doing things voluntarily, volunteering themselves to learn a skill, so that when there are resources, they can prove that they can be able to do it. And a lot of young people are doing this across the continent, where we're actually inspiring them to leverage a tool called innovative volunteerism, to retool their skills, to fabricate solar dryers, to turn agricultural waste into fertilizer. So at least they're already before resources come in. And that way we can turbocharge transformational solutions in the continent and prepare you to be ready to absorb small, medium, and big finance when it comes. And therefore, government working with development partners in developing these risk guarantees, targeting communal cooperatives that are accessible to people, will be a game changer in the African continent. Over.
Thank you very much, Richard. I really, even from the screen, I can feel your enthusiasm and your passion for this topic. It's really, really great to see. Unfortunately, I could see it on my laptop, but we could not see it here in the room. But thank you so much. Thank you very much, Courage. Richard, any feedback and reactions?
Yes, indeed. And thanks to the colleagues who have asked this question. Let me start off by saying this, and it's not necessarily something that is going to get an applause, but I will say it, which is this. Sometimes the discussion from the perspective of youth demanding, which is their right to do so, might sound good, but might not necessarily move a needle. So this is the point I'm trying to put forward. Narrative is important. And sometimes when you bring what you've done without necessarily having the finances, is actually going to attract investment. Because let me tell you, someone who has failed with nothing will definitely be an asset rather than a liability to be invested on. So taking personal responsibility and not making youth become a cost center just to be mentioned, because youth is not static. It's not static, it's dynamic. The young people of today who are 20 years, in the next 20 years will not be youth anymore, or in the next 25 years. And what does that mean? It means that, yes, you have to demand, but I've not heard a single youth in the continent come up and said, look, we must leverage local accessible institutions that are accessible to our brothers and sisters in communities. Yes, they ask for financing, but yet the narrative sometimes is more the traditional classical narrative rather than logical narrative. This is one. The second aspect which fits into the question that came from Uganda and Kenya, and especially Uganda, is that we cannot be able to say that we want money without also talking about the traceability and accountability structures we can use. And the easiest accountability and traceability structures that are closer to the young people, especially in real community, are cooperatives. Come to Kenya, which way can they be supported and that they need finance? We'll repeat this again. In Kenya, where I happen to be based, there was the Oweza Fund, which I know a thing or two about. And this Oweza Fund was actually a fund for you to be able to assess, but they needed to form groups. But when you look at the percentage of access to that fund is not up to 20%. Why? Because the youth didn't want to work together, which is a very big problem that I wanted to bring up. With that, developing the ability of working with one another to co-create solutions within the agricultural space, leveraging climate action solutions, without innovative partnerships of working together. The working alone mentality in the continent is actually costing a lot of opportunities for you to be able to leverage. And I think sometimes it's good to be able to bring this, even though it might not be palatable language, palatable messaging to pass over.
Thank you very much, Richard. Yes, Arthur, go ahead.
Thank you. No, I like that a bit provocative statement from Richard. I think this is very important. And for me, coming from a research and sort of quantitative and evaluation perspective, which is what I've focused on in my career.
The session is over. So I think maybe just to give you the opportunity to just give one last sentence, really one sentence, so a call to action to everybody present here on what you'd like to see going forward. One sentence. And last but not least, to you, Richard.
Yes, thanks again. Targeted physical incentives that lower the cost of capital for young people is what is needed now. And young people de-risking their attitudes to embrace opportunities and not only see challenges is what we need. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all my panelists. You have really been fantastic. A lot of great insights here.